He had exactly 2 hours. 2 hours on live television to end a political career. And Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana came prepared with a battered leather briefcase that contained something far more dangerous than policy papers. Receipts. Real ones. Undeniable ones. The kind that don't disappear when the cameras stop rolling. It was April 2026 in Midtown Manhattan. MSNBC had packed 700 progressives into a television studio for what they thought would be a coronation. What they got instead was a masterclass in political destruction. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked onto that stage like a fighter entering the ring for a championship bout. Cream blazer, red lipstick catching the lights, chrome earrings sparkling under the studio floods. 36 years old and absolutely electric. The room belonged to her. The audience wore her pins, her slogans, her vision of America printed on T-shirts that said, "Tax the rich." They had come to watch her destroy the old guard. They were about to watch the old guard dismantle her piece by piece, using nothing but her own words. Senator Kennedy shuffled on a moment later. Charcoal suit that had seen better decades, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose, and that briefcase. Old brown leather worn pale at the corners. 74 years old. He looked like someone's grandfather who had wandered into the wrong building on his way to file taxes. A few people in the audience actually laughed when he sat down. They wouldn't be laughing 2 hours later. The host, Michael Donovan, settled between them and smiled into the camera. Tonight, he announced, 2 voices, 2 visions, 1 America. Let us begin. The format was simple. Each guest got 4 minutes for an opening statement. Simple, except AOC spoke for 9 minutes straight. And what she said in those 9 minutes lit the fuse that would detonate her entire career. She called Donald Trump the Mussolini of Mar-a-Lago. She called the Republican Party a death cult wrapped in an American flag. She turned to Kennedy without looking at him directly and called him a relic from Jim Crow, Louisiana. Said his Southern accent was a costume. Said his folksy charm was the oldest trick in the racist playbook. She told the 700 people in that room that conservative voters were just scared old white men, terrified of women, terrified of brown people, terrified of any America that didn't look like 1955. Then she went further, much further. She said anyone who voted Republican in 2026 was complicit in fascism, complicit in the deaths of children at the border, complicit in genocide. Each sentence landed like a hammer. The crowd roared, phone cameras went up, designer protest signs went up. When she finally pointed at Kennedy and shouted that men like him and Donald Trump were the reason this country was dying. The applause stretched for nearly a full minute. Senator Kennedy did not move during any of it. He sat in his chair the way a man sits on a fishing dock at 5 in the morning, watching the line. Hands folded on his knees, glasses low on his nose, head tilted slightly to one side, the way a hunting dog tilts its head when it hears something everyone else in the room has missed. When the applause finally broke and the room settled into that electric silence that follows a knockout punch, Michael Donovan turned to Kennedy. "Senator, your response?" Kennedy adjusted his glasses with one finger. The Louisiana drawl came out thick as molasses. "Ma'am, you talk real pretty. Reminds me of a possum I had once. Real cute little thing. Kept stealing eggs from the hen house." The audience laughed. They laughed at him. They thought he was the punchline. AOC allowed herself a small, satisfied smirk. She thought she had already won. She had no idea what was about to happen. Kennedy reached down and lifted that old briefcase up off the floor, set it on the table in front of him with a soft thud that somehow carried in the silence. The leather made a sound against the wood that you could feel in your chest. "You know, ma'am," Kennedy said quietly, "I've been a country lawyer for 40-some years, and one thing I learned real early is when somebody calls you a relic, you better check what they are hiding in their own attic." 2 clicks of the briefcase latches. Loud in the studio. Final. "So before we get to Trump," Kennedy said, his voice still gentle, still calm, "let's talk about you." Michael Donovan's smile faltered just at one corner of his mouth. But the cameras caught it, and everyone watching at home caught it, and in that moment the entire energy of the room shifted, like weather changing before a storm. What came out of that briefcase next was going to end a presidential career before it even began. The first folder Kennedy pulled out was blue, stiff cardstock with a seal embossed in dull gold across the front. House Committee on Ethics Report of Investigation. The corner was bent slightly, worn from riding in that briefcase between Kennedy's Senate office and 3 Sunday morning television appearances over the past week. He held it up the way a prosecutor holds up a murder weapon, gently, at an angle that let every camera in the room get a clear shot of that seal. "This here," Kennedy said, "is the official findings of the House Committee on Ethics. Bipartisan committee. 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Released July 25, 2025, after a 3.5-year investigation. 12,000 pages of documents. Concerns a member of Congress who attended a charity ball where tickets cost $30,000 apiece. She wore a big white dress with red letters painted on the back that said, 'Tax the Rich.'" He paused just long enough for the audience to remember the photograph. They had all seen it. It had been on every magazine cover for a month. Vogue, Vanity Fair, Time magazine. The image of AOC in that flowing white gown on the steps of the Met Gala had become iconic. "Now, ma'am," Kennedy said, his voice still soft, still friendly, "do you happen to know who that congresswoman might be?" The first laugh of the night that didn't go AOC's way rippled through a few rows. Nervous laughter, uncertain laughter. She kept her face carefully still. The smirk vanished. In its place was a particular kind of stillness that only appears on a person's face when they realize the ground underneath them has started to shift. AOC found her voice. It came out measured, careful. The tone she used with hostile reporters. "That investigation," she said, "found no knowing or willful violation. The matter is closed." Kennedy nodded as if she had just told him something genuinely helpful and interesting. He turned a page in the folder. "Yes, ma'am, I read all 26 pages, every single one. Twice, once at my desk and once on the plane up here. And I want to read you what the committee actually concluded." He read slowly. Quote, "Representative Ocasio-Cortez's conduct was inconsistent with House rules, laws, and other standards of conduct." End of statement. He let the words sit in the air for a moment, then he repeated them. Inconsistent with House rules. Inconsistent with laws. Inconsistent with standards of conduct. Bipartisan finding. 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. Unanimous. AOC opened her mouth to respond. Kennedy lifted one finger off the folder. Just the index finger. A tiny gesture, as small and as final as a judge's gavel coming down. She closed her mouth. "Now hold on, ma'am," Kennedy said. "I want to read you the receipts." He pulled out the first sheet from inside the folder. It had Treasury Department forensic accounting markings running along the top in pale gray ink. He held it where every camera could see it. The audience leaned forward. It was involuntary. They couldn't help themselves. Receipt number 1, $2,500. That's a free ticket to the Met Gala for your fiancée, Riley Roberts. The committee found that to be an impermissible gift under House rules. $2,500, ma'am. That's what working folks in your district pay for a week of groceries. That's a tank of gas and a phone bill and a copay at the doctor. You let somebody else pay it for your boyfriend so he could stand around drinking champagne with billionaires. He set the sheet down flat on the table, did not stack it, left it lying there so the seals stayed visible to the cameras. He pulled the next sheet out. Receipt number 2, $2,733. That's the amount you underpaid for accessories. Earrings, handbag, shoes. The committee found you owe that money, $2,733. Ma'am, that's a month of rent for a working family in the Bronx. A whole month. The next sheet came out slower. Kennedy held it longer, let his eyes rest on it before he spoke. The studio had gone so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming somewhere above the lighting rigs. Receipt number 3. The dress itself. He looked up. The dress was designed by a company called Brother Vellies. Small company, black-owned, woman-led. Founded in 2013 by a designer named Aurora James, daughter of a Jamaican mother and a Canadian father. Miss James started Brother Vellies with a simple mission: to bring handmade leather goods from African artisans to the American market and give them a fair wage and a global platform. By the time you wore that dress, ma'am, her company had 30 employees, most of them women of color. He turned the page. Accountant invoices were stapled in sequence, each one visible under the studio lights. That dress took 250 hours of labor to make, hand-stitched, hand-embroidered. The red letters on the back were applied one at a time by artisans working in a Brooklyn studio. The accountants at Brother Vellies sent your office invoices in October of 2021, then November, then December, then January of 2022, then February, then March. 6 invoices over 6 months. No payment, not a dime. He let the silence stretch, let it fill the room. The dress that said, "Tax the Rich," was made by a black-owned, woman-led small business. And you didn't pay them for half a year. You only paid them after the federal investigation started, after they had no choice but to go public. You paid them the way people pay bills they never intended to pay until somebody made them. A woman in the second row of the audience put her hand to her mouth. Mid-50s, black, wearing a squad t-shirt under a denim jacket. The cameras caught her face. She was the first person in that room whose expression changed from excitement to something else entirely. Disappointment, recognition, the look of someone realizing they'd been sold a story that wasn't true. Receipt number 4, Kennedy continued, his voice not changing pitch, not rising, not falling, just steady and relentless as a river. Department of Labor complaint filed February 23, 2022. The hairstylist who did your hair that night, she had to threaten to file a federal labor complaint just to get her invoice paid. A working woman, a Latina stylist with 2 children of her own, doing the hair of a congresswoman wearing a dress that said, "Tax the Rich," had to threaten federal action to get her money. He pulled out one more sheet. This one he held differently, both hands, almost reverently. And receipt number 5. This is an internal email. Sent September 11th, 2021, 2 days before the Met Gala. Exchanged between Brother Vellies' accountant and the publicist handling logistics for the event. He read it word for word. Met Gala attendees don't normally pay for this. He set the email down. Folks, he said, and now he was looking out at the audience, not at AOC. The whole event runs on the assumption that politicians and celebrities get everything for free. The dresses, the shoes, the makeup, the hair, all of it. Free. And folks pay later, if they pay at all. That's the system. That's what the woman wearing "Tax the Rich" was actually wearing on her back. A free dress, made by a black-owned business that didn't get paid for 6 months. He turned back to AOC. Ma'am, 12,000 pages of documents, 3.5 years, bipartisan committee. They found the black designer didn't get paid. The Latina stylist had to threaten federal action. Your staff was emailing vendors asking if prices could be lowered to keep your costs below the gift threshold so you wouldn't have to declare it. Your staff, working for you, asking the help to charge less so you could stay under the reporting rules. AOC's mouth moved. The sound that came out was not quite a word. This is a Sex. She tried again. Her chest rose. Her hand went to her throat, then dropped back to the table. This is a... sex. The word would not form. The word that had carried her career for 7 years. The word she had deployed on cable news and in committee hearings and at rally stages from Detroit to El Paso. The word that had ended 100 uncomfortable conversations before they could even begin. It would not come out of her mouth. Kennedy waited, the way a fisherman waits when he feels the line go tight. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said gently. "What was that?" She found the rest of it, but the sound was thinner now, an octave higher than her usual register. "This is a sexist attack on the only Latina woman in—" "Ma'am," Kennedy said, and now his voice carried a weight it hadn't carried before. "Math ain't sexist. The black designer didn't get paid for 6 months. That's not sexist. That's a fact. The Latina stylist had to file with the Department of Labor. That's not sexist. That's a federal record. 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans signed this report. Unanimous. That ain't sexist. That's bipartisan." The audience went still, in a way that audiences only go still when the ground shifts under their feet. The first applause line of AOC's night had died on her tongue, and they had all watched it die in real time. Kennedy closed the blue folder, slowly, almost tenderly, the way a coroner closes a ledger after recording a cause of death. "And ma'am," he said, "this was just the warm-up. Because the receipt I'm about to show you next, that one cost real working people their jobs." The second folder Kennedy pulled from the briefcase was red. The seal across the front read, "New York State Department of Economic Development, Impact Analysis, Amazon HQ2. He laid it on the table the way you would lay a heavy book on an altar. Something weighty, something that demands respect. He did not open it right away. He sat for a moment just looking at it. And the studio sat with him. The audience had not yet recovered from the dress. They were not sure what they were about to see, but they had stopped expecting to like it. "Ma'am," Kennedy said, "this here is an economic impact study from the state of New York, put together in 2019 by the Cuomo administration after the deal was killed. So your own party members commissioned it. Concerns a project that was supposed to break ground in a place called Long Island City. You know where that is, ma'am?" The question was not really a question. It was a knife. AOC's jaw set. Long Island City is in Queens. "It's in or adjacent to my district." "Yes, ma'am, it is your neighborhood. Your constituents, folks who voted for you, folks who wake up every single morning and look out their windows at the empty lots where Amazon was supposed to build." He opened the folder. The first sheet inside was a chart, columns of numbers, bar graphs, projections running down the page in neat rows. 25,000 jobs. That was the deal. Amazon promised 25,000 jobs at an average salary of $150,000 a year. Some warehouse positions, yes, but also technology jobs, engineering jobs, apprenticeship programs for kids coming out of Queens public schools who didn't have a 4-year degree but wanted a path. 25,000 jobs. He let the numbers sit in the air, let it find weight. He turned the page. $2.5 billion in development investment. That's $2,500 million in real construction, real buildings, real concrete, real steel, real welders working real shifts, real electricians running real wire, going into the ground in Long Island City, in your district. Another page. $30 billion in projected new state revenue over the life of the project. $30,000 million to pay for schools, subway upgrades, public housing, hospitals. The kind of things you say you fight for, ma'am. He looked up, and in February of 2019, you killed it. AOC opened her mouth to respond. Kennedy did not let her. "Ma'am, I don't need to argue this with you tonight. because there is a man in this room who can tell the story better than any chart or any number ever could. He turned slightly toward the back of the studio. The cameras swung with him like hounds picking up a scent. He found the row he was looking for. "Mr. Marcus Jefferson," Kennedy said clearly. "Would you stand up, sir?" In the third row from the back, a man rose to his feet. He was black. Mid-30s. Broad through the shoulders the way a man gets broad from actual work, not from a gym. He wore a navy suit that did not quite fit. The kind a man buys for a wedding or a funeral and then keeps in a closet wrapped in plastic for the next emergency. His tie was solid burgundy. His hands were the hands of someone who had worked with them his whole life. Calloused, thick at the knuckles. He held a folded piece of yellow legal pad paper. He did not look like a politician. He did not look like an activist. He looked like somebody's brother. The cameras settled on him. The studio's 700 eyes followed. "Mr. Jefferson," Kennedy said, "could you tell the Congresswoman what happened in your life in February of 2019? Marcus Jefferson unfolded the paper. His hands trembled slightly. He looked at the page for a long moment. Then he looked up. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. "My name is Marcus Jefferson. I was born in Long Island City, New York. I went to Bryant High School. My father worked the docks at Hunts Point Market for 32 years. My mother cleaned offices in Midtown Manhattan. She rode the 7 train to work for 31 years, every single morning at 5:15, every single evening back at 7:30. He paused. In 2018, I was 22 years old. I had 2 children, 1-year-old and 3 years old. Their mother and I were not married, but we were trying. I was working 2 jobs, janitor at a midtown office building from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, dishwasher at a diner in Astoria from noon until 7 in the afternoon. I slept 4 hours between the 2 jobs on a futon in the back of my mother's apartment. I made $23,000 a year before taxes. We lived in a 1-bedroom, me, my girlfriend, my 2 kids, in my mother's building. My kids slept on a mattress on the kitchen floor. He looked at the paper again. Found his place. I got accepted into the Amazon HQ2 Community Apprenticeship Program in November of 2018. They were going to pay me $38,000 a year with full health insurance starting the first day, to learn warehouse logistics and inventory management. After 2 years, I was supposed to be promoted to a coordinator position at $65,000. After 5 years, project manager at $90,000. They were going to pay for my associate's degree at LaGuardia Community College. And they had an on-site daycare for the apprentices' kids. The studio was silent. You could hear the hum of the lights again, that low electrical buzz that only becomes audible when everything else has stopped. He looked up. He looked directly at AOC, not at Kennedy, at her. "I voted for you, Congresswoman, twice. I knocked on doors for you in 2018. Stood in the rain on East Tremont Avenue for an hour and a half, waiting to vote for you in your first primary. My mother voted for you. My aunt voted for you. My whole building voted for you. We thought you were one of us. We thought you came from where we came from. We thought you knew." He swallowed hard. On February 14th, 2019, you celebrated. You posted on Twitter, said anything is possible. I remember reading that on my phone in the back of the diner during my break. I remember my hand started to shake. I remember thinking, anything is possible for who, Congresswoman? Not for me. Not for my kids. His voice did not rise. That was what made it terrible. The apprenticeship died that day. 36 other young men and women from Long Island City and Astoria lost the same chance I lost. Most of them are still exactly where they were. 3 of them are dead, ma'am. A sound moved through the audience, not a gasp, something quieter. Something more like recognition. One of my classmates from the program died of a heroin overdose in 2021. He had been clean for 2 years before the program died. When it died, he relapsed. Another one was shot in front of his apartment building in 2020. Argument over nothing. Wrong place, wrong time. The third one took his own life in 2022. Left behind a wife and a daughter. I went to all 3 funerals. He stopped. His chest rose and fell. It took me 5 years to climb back to where I would have been on day 1 of that Amazon job. 5 years. My kids are 8 and 10 now. I missed 5 years of being able to put real food on the table. 5 years of birthday parties we couldn't afford. 5 years of school supplies we had to choose between. 5 years of telling my son no when he asked for a baseball glove because we needed the $40 for something else. All because of one tweet. He folded the paper. The billionaires you said you stopped, ma'am, they went and built somewhere else. Virginia, Nashville, they're doing fine. Jeff Bezos is fine. Andy Jassy is fine. The only people who lost was us. The folks who looked like you and lived like you and voted for you. He sat down. The silence that followed was the loudest silence in the room all night. Several seconds went by. Nobody moved. The host, Michael Donovan, did not speak. The cameras held on Marcus Jefferson's face as he settled back into his seat. Then they cut to AOC. Her chest was rising and falling. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Kennedy let it sit. He did not press. He did not gloat. He just waited the way a man waits at a funeral for the family to find their footing again. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet. 25,000 jobs at $150,000 a year over 10 years. That comes out to $375 billion in wages, ma'am. $375,000 million. You denied your own constituents $375 billion in lifetime earnings. He paused. And then, ma'am, you went out and bought yourself a Tesla. AOC's lips moved. The word that wanted to come out was racist, or maybe sexist. The sound that escaped was a half syllable, a fragment, a thing that had broken on its way to the surface. Ra. Her hand went up to her mouth. She tried again. This is a ra. Nothing more. The word would not come. The audience watched it happen. They watched her try, watched her fail, watched her realize in real time that the weapon she had carried for 7 years had stopped working in her hand. Kennedy nodded slowly, the way a country preacher nods at a confession. Ma'am, he said softly, the math doesn't care what color you are. Numbers ain't racist. Numbers are just numbers. Mr. Jefferson over there ain't racist. The kids in his apprenticeship program ain't racist. 3 of them are in the ground, ma'am. Those are your people. And you took $375 billion out of their pockets so you could send a tweet that said, anything is possible. He closed the red folder. Now, he said, let's talk about that Tesla. Kennedy did not pull out a folder this time. He reached into the briefcase and lifted out a single 8x10 photograph. Glossy, the corners slightly worn from how many times it had been handled. He laid it face down on the table. For a long beat, the studio lights caught the white border of the photo. Somewhere in the 3rd row, a phone camera clicked softly. When Kennedy turned the photograph over, AOC's face changed before the cameras could even catch up to her. A small, involuntary tightening at the corner of her mouth, the kind of micro-expression that poker players spend entire careers learning to suppress. Ma'am, Kennedy said quietly, you recognize this car? The photograph showed a white Tesla Model 3 parked at a strange angle, half on a curb, half across 2 parking spaces. New York license plate clearly visible, a congressional placard on the dashboard. The gold seal blurry in the photo, but unmistakable to anyone who had ever set foot inside the Capitol building. AOC's mouth opened, then closed. She found her words. I'm not commenting on personal, but Kennedy was already shaking his head, gently. Not at her exactly, but at the whole thing. The way a man shakes his head at a story he has heard from too many witnesses across too many courtrooms. Ma'am, I ain't asking about personal. I'm asking about principle. He set the photo down where everyone could see it. In 2018, you stood on a stage with Senator Bernie Sanders, and you said this, and I quote, "For far too long we gave money to Tesla, we gave money to a ton of people, and we got no return on our investment." You attacked Tesla. You attacked the public subsidies that built the company. You called it a billionaire boondoggle. He picked the photograph back up, held it higher. Then, in 2020, you bought one. A Tesla Model 3 long range. Retail price, $59,000. The audience made a sound. Not a laugh, something closer to a sigh of recognition. The kind of sound a congregation makes when the preacher names the sin out loud, and everyone in the pews knows exactly what he's talking about. Then, ma'am, in May of 2021, your Tesla was photographed parked illegally outside a Whole Foods grocery store in the Navy Yard neighborhood of Washington, D.C. He let the location settle. Whole Foods, ma'am, Whole Foods. The Whole Foods that is owned by Amazon. The Amazon that is owned by Jeff Bezos. The same Jeff Bezos you said was destroying America. The same Amazon you killed the deal with in Long Island City. He lowered the photograph. Looked at her over the top of his glasses. I'm just an old country lawyer from Madisonville, Louisiana. But where I come from, when you tell folks that billionaires are evil, and then you go and drive their car to their grocery store and park illegally because you're too important for the rules, we have a word for that. 2 syllables. Starts with H. The first laugh came from a black man in the 4th row. He laughed and immediately covered his mouth, surprised at himself. The laugh was the kind that escapes when something deeply true cracks through politeness. 2 seats over, an Asian woman laughed too. Then a whole row of college kids in the back. The wave moved through the audience in patches. Not the mocking laughter from the opening when the audience had laughed at Kennedy. This was different. A confessional laugh. The laugh of an audience that had been told all evening that the person at the lectern was on their side, and was now realizing, photograph by photograph, that the person at the lectern lived nothing like them at all. Kennedy did not smile. He let the laughter run its course and then settle down. And ma'am, there's more. Because in 2023 on the show Face the Nation, the host, Margaret Brennan, asked you why you owned a Tesla while the United Auto Workers were on strike. Tesla makes cars without union labor. You support the union, but you bought the non-union car. You said you would trade it in. That was 3 years ago. You still got it. He pulled another sheet from inside the briefcase, a printout from a news article. A reporter from Fox News asked you in 2025 if you still owned the Tesla. Your answer? Quote, for security reasons, I'm not commenting. He shook his head. Half a smile touched the corner of his mouth and died there before it could become a real smile. Security reasons. From the woman who said billionaires shouldn't exist, driving the billionaire's car to the billionaire's grocery store, and refusing to answer questions from her constituents about whether she still owns it. He pulled another sheet, held it briefly so the cameras could see the headline. Ma'am, in March of 2025, Tesla owners across America were facing acts of vandalism, 80 incidents nationwide, cars torched in suburban driveways, dealerships attacked with Molotov cocktails. The Department of Justice classified some of these as acts of domestic terrorism. 3 people were charged. They face 5 to 20 years in federal prison. He set the article down. You were asked on camera whether the Democratic rhetoric calling Elon Musk a Nazi might have any connection to those attacks. Your answer? Quote, for security reasons, I'm not commenting. Same answer you gave about your Tesla. Same answer you gave about the calls for political violence. Mighty convenient, ma'am. Security reasons covers a lot of ground. AOC's voice came out cracked when she tried. This is S. The word would not come. This is S. A small, helpless half-syllable. Nothing more. Kennedy waited, the way he had waited before. Then he spoke gently. I keep waiting to hear that word, ma'am. Seems to be giving you trouble today. He pulled one more piece of paper from the briefcase, shorter this time, a single page with a single line highlighted in yellow. $2,000 a month, ma'am. That's the rent on your luxury apartment in the Navy Yard. Same neighborhood as the Whole Foods. The Washington Free Beacon described the building. Climbing wall, 2 pools, racquetball courts, golf simulator, rooftop dog park, steam room. $2,000 a month for a studio apartment. He looked at the audience. The median rent for a working family in your district in the Bronx is $1,600 for a 1-bedroom. You pay more rent in Washington than your constituents pay to live in their own homes. He turned slowly to face the audience. Folks, the dress said, "Tax the rich." The Tesla was the billionaire's car. The Whole Foods was Bezos. And the apartment is in the fanciest part of Washington, with a climbing wall and a golf simulator. He held the photograph up one last time. Let them see it again. This is what we call champagne socialism. The folks at the top sell rage to the folks at the bottom, while they live the life of the very people they say need to be taxed out of existence. That ain't economics. That ain't justice. That's a con. The first real applause for Kennedy came then. Small, scattered, 3 rows in the middle of the audience and a handful of people on the wings. But it was real. Maybe 40 people, maybe 50. In an MSNBC studio in Midtown Manhattan in April of 2026, applauding a Republican from Louisiana. Kennedy nodded just once. He set the photograph down. Now, ma'am, he said, let's talk about what your big bill would actually cost the working people you say you fight for. The third folder Kennedy pulled from the briefcase was green, thicker than the others, stuffed with paper that made the folder bulge slightly at the seams. The seal across the front read, American Action Forum Economic Analysis, Green New Deal. Kennedy did not open it right away. He let it sit on the table while he took off his glasses, polished them with a small white handkerchief from his breast pocket, put them back on his nose. The gesture was deliberate. It was the kind of pause that lawyers use in courtrooms when the next question is the question. Ma'am, he said, you say you fight for the working class. Tell me how much your Green New Deal would cost, in plain English. She had been waiting for this one. She had been preparing for it through every previous round, looking for the question she could finally answer with confidence. She straightened in her chair. The cost of inaction on the climate crisis is far greater than the cost of... Ma'am, Kennedy said quietly, I asked you for a number. How much? Studies vary, and the framing of the question depends entirely on... Well, let me read you the numbers, ma'am, since the studies vary. He opened the folder. The first sheet was a cover page. The second was summary statistics printed in neat columns. American Action Forum, run by Doug Holtz-Eakin. He used to direct the Congressional Budget Office under both parties, Republican administrations, Democratic administrations. Bipartisan reputation. Their analysis? Your Green New Deal would cost between $51 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. He paused. Let the number find its way into the room. 51 trillion to 93 trillion. To put that in scale, ma'am, the entire annual gross domestic product of the United States is about $28 trillion. Your bill would cost up to 3 years of everything the country produces. Every car, every house, every loaf of bread, every steak, every paycheck. 3 years of everything we make. Gone. Another sheet came out. Competitive Enterprise Institute analysis. Per household cost in year 1? $74,287. He looked over his glasses at her. $74,000 per family in 1 year, just for energy. He pulled another sheet from the folder. This one had a chart, bar graphs in red and blue. He held it up so the cameras could see. "Ma'am, do you know what the median household income is in your own district?" Silence. $68,000. 68. Your bill costs each family $74,000. That's more than they earn. You're asking working families in the Bronx and Queens to pay more in energy bills than they bring home in a year. Just to keep the lights on. He let it settle. Let the math do its work. After year one, the cost falls down to $47,755 per household per year. $47,000. Every single year, forever, for energy. The audience had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that follows a number too large to argue with. Kennedy reached for another sheet. He held it for a long moment before reading. 1.1 million jobs lost per year, according to the Heritage Foundation analysis. 1.1 million American working families wiped out. Every year, for decades. He looked up. "Let me tell you who that is, ma'am. The pipeline welders in Beaumont, Texas. Men with hands like leather who've been doing that work for 30 years. The coal miners in Mingo County, West Virginia. Third generation in the same holes their grandfathers dug. The truckers running long haul out of Joplin, Missouri. The refinery workers in Lake Charles, Louisiana, in my own state, who feed their families on shift work. The auto plant workers in Lordstown, Ohio. The natural gas crews in Pennsylvania. The drillers in North Dakota working in -20-degree weather. The oil field roughnecks in Midland, Texas. The shipbuilders in Pascagoula, Mississippi." He paused. "Folks who get up at 4 in the morning and come home at 7 at night. Folks whose backs are bent from the work. Folks who built this country with their hands." Another pause, longer this time. "Your bill kills every one of those jobs, every one of those families, every one of those communities. Not on accident, ma'am, on purpose, as policy, as goal, as mission." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a calculator. The same beat-up pocket calculator he had been using in Senate hearings since before AOC was in middle school. The buttons clicked in the silence of the studio. Click, click, click. 68,000, he said, working the math out loud. Median income in your district, minus 74,000. First-year energy cost from your bill, equals, the display read, -6,000. He held it up so the cameras could zoom in. $6,000. That means a working family in your district goes $6,000 in the hole the first year. Just trying to keep the lights on. Just trying to heat the apartment in February. Just trying to drive their kid to the emergency room when she gets sick. He set the calculator down. And ma'am, that ain't even the worst part. He pulled out one final document. It was a printout from the Washington Post, yellowed slightly from age, the corner stapled. He had carried this paper for years. The audience could see it in how worn it was. This is an interview with your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarty. Date of publication, May 10, 2019. He sat down with the Washington Post. He gave them a quote that has lived in my desk drawer for 7 years. He read it slowly, every word deliberate. Quote, "The interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. We really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing." He looked up. "How do you change the entire economy thing?" He folded the paper carefully, set it on top of the green folder. Your own top aide, on the record, with the Washington Post, said the bill was not really about climate, said it was about fundamentally transforming the American economy, tearing it down, and building something else. He let the words land. "Ma'am, when the working folks of Pennsylvania ask why they can't afford a tank of gas, this is the answer. When the truckers in Ohio ask why their fuel is 40% higher than 5 years ago, this is the answer. When the steelworkers in Pittsburgh ask why their plant is shutting down, this is the answer. When Mr. Jefferson in Long Island City asks why the apprenticeship programs disappeared, this is the answer. He pointed lightly toward Marcus Jefferson, who still sat in the third row from the back, hands folded in his lap. It was never about climate. It was about transforming an economy that you don't think working folks are smart enough to run for themselves. About building a country where the bureaucrats decide and the working folks obey. The host of the show, Michael Donovan, had been silent for the entirety of this round. Now he cleared his throat. His voice came out careful, measured. "Congresswoman," he said, "the studies on these costs are widely cited. Do you have a counter-estimate?" The studio fell silent in a new way. The kind of silence that comes when a referee has stopped calling fouls for the Democrat. AOC opened her mouth. She had no number. She tried. "This is The word would not form. She closed her mouth. She tried again, smaller this time, almost whispered. "This is Half a syllable, nothing more. The host did not save her. He was not allowed to, not anymore. Kennedy did not interrupt. 5 seconds passed, then 10, then 15. The cameras held on her face. The studio held its breath. The most famous voice in progressive politics in America had no answer. The audience saw it. So did the cameras. So did everyone watching at home in living rooms in Iowa and Ohio and North Carolina and Pennsylvania and Florida. Senator Kennedy nodded gently. He closed the green folder. "Ma'am," he said, "that's what we call a tell back in Louisiana. When somebody can't even argue back, we know they ain't got a hand to play." He set the folder on the table next to the other two. "Now," he said, his voice lower than before, "let's talk about something heavier than money." The fourth folder Kennedy pulled from the briefcase was black, heavier than the others. The seal across the front said simply, "United States Senate Judiciary Committee Oversight." Kennedy set it on the table with a soft thud, did not open it. He let his hand rest on it for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been all night. It was not the country lawyer's drawl anymore. It was something underneath that, something older, the voice a man uses at a graveside. "Ma'am," he said, "I want to start this round with a word." He paused. "Auschwitz." The studio went absolutely still. The hum of the air conditioning became audible again. Several members of the audience drew breath at the same time, the way people draw breath in a room where someone has just invoked the dead. Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor, Majdanek, Kelno. He named them slowly, one at a time. Like a roll call. Concentration camps. Death factories. 6 million Jews murdered. 1.1 million at Auschwitz alone. Roma, Sinti, disabled children gassed at clinics. Polish priests, Soviet prisoners, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, political dissidents, the full inventory of human evil. Organized into a railway timetable, trains running on schedule, schedules signed by clerks who went home to their wives at night. He looked at AOC, let his eyes rest on her. "Ma'am, in June of 2019, you went on Instagram Live, and you said, and I quote, 'The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border.'" AOC found her voice. It was quieter than her opening. The fight had gone out of it, but the words were still there. "I stand by that statement, and I stand by—" Kennedy held up one finger. "Hold on, ma'am. Before you stand by it, I want to read you what the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum said about your statement. Not me, not the Republican Party. The official Holocaust Museum of the United States of America. Established by an act of Congress in 1980, built on the National Mall, visited every year by survivors and their children and their grandchildren. The museum that exists for one reason and one reason only: to remember the actual 6 million. He opened the black folder. The first page was a press release. official letterhead across the top. Quote, "The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum unequivocally rejects efforts to create analogies between the Holocaust and other events, whether historical or contemporary. The museum further rejects efforts by individuals or institutions to compare the Holocaust to other tragedies." He folded the page, set it down. "That's the Holocaust survivors and the museum that exists to honor their memory, telling you that you were wrong. They didn't say it gently, ma'am. They said your statement was rejected. Unequivocally rejected." That's a strong word. They don't use it often. He pulled out another sheet. "And ma'am, the day after you made that comment, the Auschwitz Memorial Museum in Poland responded directly to you. The actual museum at the actual death camp. They tweeted it from their official account. They quoted your remarks and they said this," he read slowly. Quote, "Concentration camps were sites of systematic state murder. They were not metaphors. They were not exaggerations. Comparing them to other situations, even with the best of intentions, dishonors the memory of those who suffered and died there." He looked up. "Auschwitz, ma'am. The actual museum at the actual death camp where 1.1 million people were murdered." "Told you that you were wrong." He pulled out another sheet. This one had the seal of the United States Senate across the top. "And in the same month you called migrant facilities concentration camps, the United States Congress voted on a bill. Senate Bill 811, $4.5 billion. Emergency humanitarian funding for migrant children at the border. Money for food, money for medical care, money for soap and beds and clothes. Money for the children, ma'am. The children you said were in concentration camps." He looked at her. "You voted no." AOC's mouth opened. The defense was thinner now, almost rote. "Throwing more money at the agencies committing human rights abuses is—" "Ma'am," Kennedy said, and his voice was quiet, "the bill was for food, for children. You voted no on food for children." He pulled out a printed sheet. Congressional record stamp in the corner. "Here is your actual floor statement from June 27, 2019. Word for word from the official record." He read it slowly. Let the words come out into the studio one at a time and find their own weight. "And ma'am, here's the part that makes my heart hurt. Because while you were calling American facilities concentration camps and voting against feeding children, do you know who that money was going to feed? 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds, brown children, Latino children, kids whose parents made the journey through Mexico to get here. The kids in your own ethnic community." He paused. "You voted no on food for them." The studio was silent in a way that had a different texture than before. Earlier silences had been the silence of an audience watching a politician get cornered. This silence was something else. This was the silence of an audience that had stopped rooting for either side and had started thinking about its own children. "But ma'am," Kennedy continued, "the worst part of this round is not what happened in 2019. The worst part is what you said 3 weeks ago." He pulled out a printed transcript. The seal at the top was a generic one, not government, just a label. "New York City Democratic Socialists of America Internal Forum Recording. Ma'am, on April 1st of this year, you attended a private DSA forum in New York City. You thought it was off the record. You thought no one was recording. But the meeting was streamed online to members. And City and State magazine got a partial recording. They published it on April 1st. It's in the public record now." He read, quote, "I have not once, ever voted to authorize funding to Israel, and I will never. The Israeli government should be able to finance their own weapons if they seek to arm themselves." He paused. A DSA member followed up. "Ask you specifically, would you commit to voting no on any spending on arms for Israel, including so-called defensive capabilities? Iron Dome? Missile defense? The system that intercepts rockets fired at civilians?" He read her answer. Quote, "Yes." He folded the paper. "Ma'am, Iron Dome doesn't shoot anybody. It doesn't kill anybody. It doesn't invade anybody." It doesn't occupy, it doesn't target. It is a system of interceptor missiles that intercepts rockets fired at civilians. At apartment buildings, at hospitals, at a kindergarten in Sderot, at a bat mitzvah in Jerusalem, at a pizza shop in Tel Aviv full of teenagers eating after school. He looked at her. You committed to voting against the shield, the thing that stops the rockets. You said you wouldn't even support the defensive system that keeps children from getting blown up on the way to school. He pulled one final document. Let me tell you what Iron Dome actually does, ma'am. October 7th, 2023. Hamas terrorists launched approximately 5,000 rockets at Israel in the first wave of attacks. Iron Dome intercepted 90% of the rockets that threatened populated areas. Without Iron Dome, the death toll on October 7th would not have been 1,200. It would have been 20,000, maybe more. Children at school. Babies in cribs. Old folks in synagogues. He set the paper down. Iron Dome saved thousands of civilian lives that day. He looked at her. And ma'am, you committed 3 weeks ago in a private meeting where you thought no one was listening to oppose the funding that keeps that shield in the air. You committed to letting the rockets through. The audience sat in a silence that had become almost holy. Kennedy turned slowly toward the back of the studio. Mrs. Rosario Mendez, he said, would you stand up, ma'am? In the 7th row, a woman rose, late 50s, dark hair pulled back into a tight knot. She wore a navy dress and a cardigan, the kind a Catholic woman wears to a weekday mass. A small gold cross hung at her throat. Her hands were folded in front of her. She did not hold notes. Rosario Mendez spoke without paper. Her voice was steady. The Spanish accent was soft underneath the English. The way a mother's old language stays in her voice when she has been speaking the new one for 40 years. My name is Rosario Mendez. I was born in Havana, Cuba, in 1968. My father was a teacher. My mother was a nurse. Both of them dissidents. Both of them watched friends disappear in the night. My father was arrested by Castro's secret police 3 times. The 3rd time, in 1979, he was held for 14 months in a real prison. Not a metaphor. A real prison. A cement block with no light. They beat him with a rubber truncheon every Tuesday and every Friday. He came home weighing 112 pounds. He had been 178. She took a breath. We escaped Castro's regime in 1982 on a fishing boat. I was 13 years old. We sailed from a coastal village outside Mariel in a boat built for 8 people. There were 31 of us. 3 did not make it. 1 was a baby. Her mother held her body for the last 6 hours of the trip and cried without making any sound. Her name was Esperanza. It means hope. The studio did not move. We came to the United States. My family applied for legal asylum at the processing center in Miami. We waited 11 years for our citizenship. 11 years of paperwork, 11 years of interviews, 11 years of background checks, 11 years of going to the immigration office in downtown Newark to update our addresses. 11 years of doing it the right way. She straightened. I am brown. I am Latina. I am an immigrant. I am a Catholic. I am an American. I am a wife. I am a mother of 3. I am a registered nurse. I work the surgical floor at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. I have voted in every election since I became a citizen in 1993. I have voted Republican most of those years, and Democrat some of those years. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I voted for John McCain. I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I voted for him again in 2024. She paused. I am a person, Congresswoman. I am not a demographic. She looked at AOC. For 7 years, I have watched you use my face to push policies that hurt my children's country. I have watched you call concerned American mothers racist for asking that everyone come the same legal way I did. I have watched you call border facilities concentration camps, while my cousins in Cuba live in real ones. Real ones, Congresswoman, with real bars, with real torture. I have watched you say defending children from rockets is genocide. Her voice did not rise. It got quieter somehow, which made it louder. And tonight, I came here on my own dime, on a bus from Newark to Manhattan, to tell you in front of all your supporters that you do not speak for me. She let it land. You do not speak for legal Latina immigrants. You do not speak for people of faith. You do not speak for working women. You do not speak for refugees who actually fled actual concentration camps. She paused. You speak only for yourself and the people who paid for your dress. She sat down. The silence that followed was the deepest silence of the night. It went on for several seconds. The cameras did not move. The host did not speak. AOC's eyes were fixed on the table. Her hands were flat on the wood, white at the knuckles. She tried one last time to call out the word. She tried to say racist, to say sexist, to say Islamophobic, to say transphobic, to say any of the words that had carried her career for 7 years and ended 100 conversations before they could even begin. Nothing came out. Her lips moved, her chest rose. She made a small sound that was not a word. Then she stopped trying. She just looked down at the table. Kennedy waited a long moment. He did not gloat. He did not press. He just waited the way a man waits at a funeral for the family to find their footing. Then he closed the black folder. "Ma'am," he said very softly, "I think we're done." Senator Kennedy stood up. It was the first time he had stood all night. 2.5 hours into the broadcast, he stood the way an older man stands, slowly, with one hand on the table for balance. He buttoned his charcoal jacket with the other hand. He picked up the briefcase. He did not look at AOC right away. He looked at Marcus Jefferson in the 3rd row from the back, then at Rosario Mendez in the 7th row. Then he turned finally to face the woman in the cream blazer. He walked around the table, 3 slow steps. He stopped in front of her. When he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been in any of the previous rounds. The drawl was still there, but the showmanship was gone. What was left was a man speaking to another person. "Ma'am, I'm going to tell you something. I came here tonight because your network invited me. They thought you were going to make a fool of the country lawyer. Maybe you thought so too. That's fine. I've been underestimated my whole career." He turned slightly to face the cameras. "I went to a little school called Vanderbilt for college, then a little school called the University of Virginia for law, then a school across the ocean called Magdalen College, Oxford, for another degree in law. Then I went home to Madisonville and started representing folks who got hurt by big companies. 40-some years." He turned back to her. "You called me a relic. You called Trump a fascist. You called the GOP a death cult. You called conservative voters scared old men afraid of the future." He paused. "I am a relic. I'm 74 years old. I've been around long enough to know what real Americans look like. And they don't look like a Met Gala. They don't look like $60,000 Teslas parked at Whole Foods. They don't look like luxury apartments with climbing walls. They don't look like designer dresses that say, 'Tax the rich,' while a black-owned business waits 6 months to get paid." He gestured behind him toward the back of the studio. "Real Americans look like Mr. Marcus Jefferson over there. Lost 5 years of his life because of a tweet. Real Americans look like Mrs. Rosario Mendez. Spent 11 years in line waiting for citizenship while you accused folks like her of bigotry for following the law. Real Americans look like the welders in Beaumont and the truckers in Joplin and the nurses in Newark and the apprenticeship kids in Long Island City who never got their chance." He paused. "My daddy was a fertilizer salesman in Centerville, Mississippi. Worked his whole life. Drove 300 miles a day in an old green Buick that smelled like tobacco and diesel. Sold seed and feed to farmers who paid him in cash and sometimes in chickens. Never made more than $30,000 in his best year." His voice softened. "He sent me to Vanderbilt, ma'am. He sent me to UVA Law. He sent me to Oxford. Not because he was rich, because he worked. Worked until he couldn't work anymore. Died of a heart attack at the steering wheel of that Buick in 1991. They found him on a county road outside Zachary with the engine still running. His voice dropped even lower. You called him a scared old man tonight. Indirectly. When you called every conservative voter that, you called my daddy that. You called my mama a scared old woman. You called my Uncle Beauregard, who couldn't read until he was 31 years old, but who built a bait shop in Zachary, Louisiana with his own hands and ran it for 53 years. You called him a scared old man. You called every shrimper and welder and farmer and trucker and small businessman in my state scared old men. You called every legal immigrant from Cuba and Vietnam and Korea and the Philippines who voted Republican because they came from real socialism. You called them scared old men, too. He held up the briefcase. And tonight, ma'am, the only thing left of your career is what's in this briefcase. 5 rounds, 5 sets of receipts, the Met Gala where the black designer didn't get paid for 6 months, Amazon, where 25,000 jobs were killed for a tweet, the Tesla parked illegally at the billionaire's grocery store, the Green New Deal, which costs working families more than they earn, and the Iron Dome, where you said you would oppose the defensive system that stops rockets from hitting children on the way to school. He paused. You wanted to debate Donald Trump tonight. Donald Trump ain't here. I am here. And in 2 hours and 20 minutes, I just made the case against him in your own words. Your own votes, your own receipts, your own dress, your own car. Your own bill, your own private DSA recording. I didn't bring a thing to this stage that didn't come out of your own life. He looked at her one last time. His eyes were not unkind. Ma'am, I don't take any pleasure in this. Watching a young woman destroy her own life through vanity and ideology is not pleasant. You're smart. You went to Boston University. You worked your way up. You worked as a waitress in Manhattan. You knew what it was like to count tips at the end of a shift. You had every chance to be a real voice for working people. Every chance. He paused. And somewhere along the line, you decided that being right was less important than sounding right. That sounding angry was easier than getting answers. That blaming people who looked like me was easier than helping people who looked like Mr. Jefferson over there. He exhaled. That's the tragedy. That's the only thing I'm sad about tonight. He turned, walked back to his chair, set the briefcase down, sat, folded his hands on the table. Mr. Donovan, he said, looking at the host, I think we're done here, sir. The studio was silent. Then slowly, in the back rows, someone began to clap. One man, a second, a third, a whole row in the middle. Then the applause moved like weather across a plain, row by row, section by section. Then the whole studio, the MSNBC New York audience, the audience that had cheered when AOC called Trump Mussolini, the audience that had laughed at Kennedy's possum line, the same audience. They stood. They applauded a Republican from Louisiana for 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Marcus Jefferson stood with them. So did Rosario Mendez. So did the black woman in the second row who had put her hand to her mouth when Kennedy had named Aurora James. So did the college kids in the back rows who had come to cheer for AOC and were now clapping for a country lawyer they had never heard of when the night started. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat at the table with her head down. The red lipstick was smudged at the corner of her mouth. The cream blazer was rumpled where her arms had been folded. Her chrome earrings caught the studio lights one last time. Her hands stayed flat on the table. She did not cry. She did not yell. She did not stand and walk off. She just sat. The way a person sits when the floor of their life has gone out from under them. And the only thing left to do is wait for the room to stop spinning. Michael Donovan looked at the camera. His face was carefully blank. We'll be right back, he said. Cut to commercial. By morning, the segment had been replayed on every network. MSNBC ran it twice without commentary. The Mr. Jefferson testimony alone had been viewed 64 million times before noon. The Rosario Mendez testimony? 51 million. The Iron Dome confrontation? 38 million. The voice cracks were already memes circulating on every platform from Twitter to TikTok. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez issued a statement through her chief of staff, Mike Casca. Quote, "The Congresswoman remains focused on serving the people of New York's 14th Congressional District. She did not answer questions. She did not appear on television for 14 days. She canceled 2 weeks of public appearances. Her staff stopped responding to press inquiries by Thursday." Senator Bernie Sanders was asked on CNN whether he stood by AOC. He paused for 9 full seconds before answering. 9 seconds on live television feels like an eternity. "Tonight raised questions," he said carefully. "Our movement needs to answer them." House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries declined to comment when stopped by reporters at a Capitol Hill stakeout. He walked past the cameras with his head down, didn't say a word. The DSA, New York City chapter, held a closed emergency meeting that lasted 7 hours. They did not release a statement afterward. Senator Kennedy's book, How to Test Negative for Stupid and Why Washington Never Will, returned to the New York Times bestseller list at number 1. There was no expulsion, no resignation, no FBI investigation, no handcuffs, no perp walk, no federal charges, no grand jury. There were only receipts. And receipts don't evaporate. When the applause fades and the cameras turn off and ideology collides with undeniable receipts, who truly pays the price for the grand promises made on a political stage? The politicians who make them, or the working-class citizens who are forced to live with the consequences?